Coach!
Maybe there are two versions of reality.
Are you okay?
Most of the time, the other one, the bad one, is
Yeah, I'm fine.
hiding or waiting. But it's all real.
I'm gonna be just fine.
What's up, state champs? God damn it! What the fuck do you want?
You like guys?
What the hell?
No, sorry, I...
Misty, what are you doing? I think Misty poisoned me again. Service here sucks. Could you just push me off?
How could you even say that to me?
I can't just be like this now. Why couldn't I die?
Because we needed you.
In that case, love is everything. It's the whole reason that we're here. Let me fucking die.
You're a good person, Coach. You really don't belong in this place.
Hello Yellowjackets and fellow Mudbeards, and today we're going to be bringing another Yellowjackets video. So I wasn't originally planning on doing another Yellowjackets video because I had just released an In Defense of Shauna Shipman video, which you should definitely check out. Point is, I watched the recent episode 6 of season 3, and I couldn't help but just address some of the things that are just lingering on my mind. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about some of the biggest questions and share some of my theories on what we got this episode because it was a doozy. I want to start off by sharing something I thought was unexpectedly good about this episode and something I thought was unexpectedly bad. What I didn't expect was to actually see Lisa again. Having her return to the story and being involved with the plot again, even if it's just to kind of add some closure to that whole storyline with Lottie's compound, is still really nice to see. It doesn't really make much sense how much she blames the Yellowjackets for what happened, considering she was also aiming a gun at Natalie, but I digress. One aspect of this episode I really didn't like was the fact that Callie had held on to those tapes for so long. And I'm not just talking narratively, I'm talking writing-wise. I'm someone who will always give creatives benefit of the doubt, but in this certain situation I do want to add some constructive criticism. I can't understand the idea of having Callie get access to the tapes so long before they were actually revealed to the rest of the plot if they weren't even going to be introduced to her character alone. Now, to preface, there is a chance that later in the season it will be revealed that Callie actually did listen to the tapes, and if that is the case, then this whole point is moot. But if she really did just grab those tapes and hold on to them in her drawer until they could be used later in the plot, and they weren't actually relevant to be introduced that early anyways, then I'm pretty disappointed. Again, the season's not over yet, so jury's still out, but that's just what I liked and disliked about the episode. Let's move on to some interesting questions this episode gave us. Number 1 being, what's going on with Ty and Van? We had a scene very reminiscent of the scene in Stranger Things where they're trying to make contact with Will through the lights, this being Van looking through her stuff and finding a phone, where the show seems to imply that she hears other Ty trapped within Dark Ty's body, thus sort of confirming, along with later moments in the episode, that Dark Ty has been running the show the whole time. Props to all who guessed that. Either way, I'm very intrigued to see what they do with this. Logical reasoning could say that Van's disease or illness is actually affecting her mind in some way and she was just hallucinating. Spiritual connections are blatantly obvious. Could this be the actual confirmation we need on if the show is actually spiritual or not? This one I think we'll just have to wait and see. But moving on. Another interesting thing to note is that another character that had gotten a phone call seemingly from the afterlife was Ben when he was communicating with his boyfriend in the cabin. And ironically enough, he led him to his new hiding place, as well as that same person tends to keep memorabilia of his past relationships. Is it possible that that same memorabilia will come back into play at some point? To address my video from last week on letting Coach just pass away and not really forcing him to suffer anymore, we got probably my best death that I would have wanted for him. See, getting shot up on a firing line, not very humane. Getting eaten alive, also not very great. At least this way he got an end to his suffering, which he didn't even deserve in the first place, but he got it ended by Natalie, who their connection has always been so strong, so it was at least narratively satisfying. However, it sucks because before he met up with Mari, he was fine. Obviously things were still struggling for him, but if he had never helped Mari, he could have ran into those hikers and potentially been the one to talk some reason into him. And then maybe gotten some help. I don't know. Point is, I knew the fact that he chose to help Mari was going to result in his death in some way. I don't blame Mari though. I actually really like what they're doing with her character and how she has a lot more depth to her involving all these situations that they're showing in such small and intimate moments. So it's really cool to actually see this development of her, which only solidifies the fact that she will be Pit Girl, but I'll touch on that later. Why did they feel the need to eat the coach, you might be asking? They have food, they just addressed it even in this episode. I think this is a direct result of them fully devolving into the wilderness culture they've developed. And no, I don't mean they're all fully believing in the wilderness, but they're all accepting of the way the wilderness works around them, and what they have to do to survive. See, it's not just about eating because you're hungry anymore. It's about eating so you can fit within the congregation that's being built. We see that once you start to become an outsider with these tribalistic group of girls, things don't really pan out too well for you. That, and it wouldn't be as interesting if they weren't eating a human when the hiker showed up. I also want to address the fact that when they're all harmonizing in that beautiful song between all of them, you actually can hear Pit Girl screaming, I believe. I'm not 100% sure on that, which would imply, yet again, that Pit Girl is one of our girls and not any of the new characters we were just introduced to. But an interesting thing to note is that Lottie has yet again had some sort of premonition, starting this whole ritual before that sound of presumably fracking or whatever it is started screaming at them. Yet another example of the supernatural, I feel. See, we all know she has an illness, but to have an illness that predicts the future is seriously different. This is the third time now we've seen this. Once when she was a kid, another time at the cabin when the windows busted open, and then now. And sure, you could argue that Laura Lee's plane crash and thinking about the red water and the wolf attack is also premonitions, but you could also debate a bit more against those, so I'm not going to include them. Either way, I am intrigued by the fact that she had seemed to feel this need to let the girls know that they were doing things wrong, just sitting there and enjoying the food. Maybe it was a wilderness's way of letting the girls know they should really be enjoying and honoring this entire feast they've presented for themselves, rather than sitting in a solemn, awkward silence. Which I do find pretty weird. If you're gonna cut the guy's head off and put it on a pedestal like some sort of ceremony, why would you then just sit awkwardly around it like you're uncomfortable to be there? Who would willingly put it up there anyways? It's one thing to eat him because he's dead, it's another thing to put his corpse up on display and eat right in front of it. But yet again, I digress. This scene inevitably segues us into some new characters that have been introduced. And there's a few interesting things to note. One, Shauna had finally become leader, and this is not going to go well for her. She's going to be very angry that finally when she has some power and some control and sway with the girls, it's going to be taken away from her, seemingly. But like I said, something to pay attention to is what these characters are wearing. It is still not winter yet, and we know the Pit Girl scene is still yet to come, which means these new characters are going to be with our Yellowjackets for quite a bit, or at least until the snow falls. That is, if they don't get killed and eaten first, which is likely. But notice something specifically about what they're wearing. They're not wearing something as if they've been hiking in the wilderness for days on end. They look like they've relatively gone on a short walk. I've seen some people suggest they were bird watchers of some kind, which could imply that the girls aren't as far from civilization as they may have thought. And it really does make you think, if the girls hadn't set up this entire little ritual for themselves, things wouldn't have been as awkward when these people did show up. And interestingly enough, if Ben had stayed alive just a little bit longer, he would have been saved by them. But I did see someone share a perspective that killing Ben and offering it to the wilderness and consuming his flesh is what bridged them to civilization, as in civilization was brought directly to them. Now, if you keep following this theory, pay attention to Akila's vision. Akila had a vision of the bear showing up to a camp that was flashing between empty and full. This bear could resemble the bear that showed up to the camp and provided the girls with food when they needed it most. Is it possible that if the wilderness is real, they could be providing another three-eyed bear, as in the new campers / civilization, maybe as a test to see if the girls will actually solidify themselves into this new culture they've developed? If you look at it from that perspective, then these new little dweebs we're into could be seen as an offering. The wilderness seeing if the girls are ready to cut off that connection to civilization. I think depending on how next episode goes, if it starts off violent, then we know there's a contrast between the wilderness the girls live in and civilization, and it will show that there is an adversity there. Let's go ahead and touch on the idea that one of the new characters could be Pit Girl. She has long hair, dark long hair. It's possible now. I still don't believe it. Do not think that this is Pit Girl. I think in general they are giving us that as a sort of red herring, but I don't see them keeping her around all the way through winter, then dressing her up in a tiny little nightgown and then hunting her down. That, coupled with the fact that it really just wouldn't be as narratively satisfying, I really do think that it's going to end up being Mari. I don't think there's any other choice. Especially seeing that her character is getting so many sympathetic moments this season. These are just checking off all the boxes that tell us that Mari does not have long to live. And while normally that bummed me out, being YouTube's #1 Mari fan, I am someone who is only okay with her dying if it's as the Pit Girl scene. Part of why I even liked her in the first place was because of her potential connection to Pit Girl. That, and she offered fruit roll-ups to Aquila on the very first episode. Which is just a homie thing to do. But if Mari isn't Pit Girl, then why introduce these new campers in general? Is it just to show the girl slowly descending into madness? I don't think so. See, I think one of these campers is directly tied to the tapes we saw introduced in these episodes. In this episode, we got a few seconds of audio from the tapes. And it could be apparent that none of our Yellowjackets are aware that one of these new random dweebs could have been recording things the whole time, maybe as a birdwatcher or a nature observer. The point is, if the girls didn't make sure to lock away that evidence, when someone had come back to investigate, maybe they had found those tapes. Thus begging the question, could whoever's messing with Shauna and her family in the modern day be connected to those tapes or the birdwatchers that were out there? I really hope that is the case, or that she's just being paranoid altogether, because the narrative is starting to build up the idea that Melissa is going to be Hilary Swank's character, and I really don't want that to be the case. Primarily because my analytical brain already studied the trailer 10 million times over, and if Hilary Swank doesn't really show up to the last episode, which seems likely, then the odds of her revealing herself as Melissa but older are pretty high. And sure, maybe the way it's written will be good enough that it won't really bother me. We'll have to see my reaction then. But yeah, those are my thoughts. I think the tapes are directly tied to the birdwatchers. I think it's weird how much supernatural evidence we got this episode, but I do really like where the plot's going. I don't know. I'm someone who will definitely advocate for this season more than any of the others. I know some people may have their problems narratively, but as someone who's primarily interested in characters and character arcs and stories, this season is definitely my favorite. But I'll leave that with you guys. Do you think the supernatural is real within the series? Do you think those tapes maybe belong to the birdwatchers? Do you think Melissa will be returning as Hilary Swank? I don't know. Either way, thank you guys so much for watching. I just had to share some of my thoughts. And remember, if you see a bunch of girls chanting and screaming in the woods around a fire, walk the other direction.